Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to my humble lounge. Today I am reading from the Tales of the Ambassador series. If you enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe to help my channel grow. Without further ado, let's get to it. Tales of the Ambassador, Part 2. 9 months. 9 months of work without so much as a day off, let alone a vacation. Today, I finally get to have time for myself. First day of 3 weeks R&R. Everything settled down enough. The minor monopolies were broken up and the resultant competition increased production by 20%. Our newest pulse wave detector found the HQs of the pirates that had been raiding shipments despite their jammers. The system for resettling on Project New Haven is finally fleshed and the 4th colony is already well underway. Valroy's in charge of cybernetics and Mike's in charge of federal affairs. They both know I'll kill them if they interrupt my break for anything less than Armageddon. Everything I need to do is dealt with. Now to queue up some old jazz, make my favorite coffee, and start catching up on all the light novels I've fallen behind on. Weeks of fatigue pop and crack themselves out as I ease into my chair. Bring up the next novel of my favorite series on my data slate, and there was Mike, bursting in without waiting for an answer. Face ashen, sweat stained. With a soul-wrenching sigh, I put my slate down, take a long gulp of coffee, and get up. What the hell is it? I'm already grabbing my things. Whatever it was had Mike shaking worse than I'd ever seen. Aliens. Some sort of craft crashed into an asteroid in the Kuiper Belt after exiting a stable slipstream. The sensors were built to pick up the pirates pinged them. The old sensors wouldn't have even noticed. I nodded, putting on my shoes. Any hostile action so far? No, sir. We think it's a recon drone. Advanced ultrasound, AUS, doesn't show anything alive inside it. The thing's barely 3 cubed feet as it is. It's being transported here now. Finally, I grabbed my coffee from the table and met Mike at the door. Let's get to it then, and hope you didn't actually interrupt my vacation for Armageddon. I walk outside with a soft chuckle. Going by his expression, Mike didn't enjoy the joke. The warm thrum of the ship's hypertravel reverberated gently in the air in my private quarters. It made me wish ships had souls I could talk to, a voice to match its beating heart. Tingling vibrations spread across my tendrils as I caressed the wall. It felt sometimes like it was whispering to me, telling me tales of its life. Copies of its design existed, of course, but its travels and story was its own. The birth of mind and engineering, nurtured by those it existed to safeguard and transport through the void. Technology is such a beautiful thing. Pulling myself away from the ship, I began searching for articles on Nirva. I already knew a great deal about Yagrak and Mickey as fellow ambassadors. Nirva's fame and accomplishments being nearly legendary, however, I decided to look and find an interview on a rare failure. After looking for a while, I found what looked like a tastelessly rude interview of Nirva right after a defeat. It seemed he'd nearly died in a skirmish with the Legion and had lost the refugees he'd been assigned to escort. It had been done so quickly after Nirva's return, he was still getting bandaged. Can you tell us what happened, where everything went wrong? Nirva scratched a scar on his chest with a broken claw and looked up with tired, golden eyes. They outnumbered us, forced my knights and I far enough away from the transport to crash a slave fighter loaded with plasma charges directly through the shields and into the engine core. Wincing as a bandage was tied off and that arm freed, he lifted the other for the doctor to work on. They ran then. Their only aim was the refugees. We bled each other in the pursuit and took a small vengeance for the dead. My ship's engine got hit, and I barely ejected in time." The doctor was nearly done. The interviewer wanted to dig himself deeper, it seemed. "Half of your flight was destroyed alongside the refugees. Was this the result of leaked information? Was your deployment before this mission too long with too little rest? Was there any way this tragedy could have been prevented?" "No, I can't think of a way it could have been prevented. Ambushes like this are a common tactic of the Legion, but not in the numbers we fought. I do not believe there is a leak, but am in no position to make any claims about the possibility. Battle fatigue may have played a role, but it was not the deciding factor." Neva stood, the light turning his golden irises aflame. "That is all I have to say. I need to see to the living and prepare funeral rites for the dead." I wasn't sure if I was more surprised by Neva's composure or of the reporter being so rude to a death wielder. Kriots aren't known for tact, but neither are death wielders for patience, and it's a universal principle not to piss one off. There weren't many other defeats to look at, and none stood out to me as much as the first. I transitioned my research over to learning what I could about the military instead. Being an expert on technology and negotiations, I had little knowledge of how the Alliance military worked beyond it being almost exclusively made up of death wielders. Seeing that we'd be meeting death wielders soon, I thought it time to brush up. It was common knowledge that the Halaki earned their place on the Elder Four due to being the backbone of the military. I was surprised to learn they'd willingly reshaped their society to encourage excessive copulation to fulfill that role. It was against the tenets of their faith to augment their own biology, but their core belief of being the protectors of peace in the galaxy meant they needed more warriors to fill the lines. Copulation became a holy duty to them, and has risen to be a sacred ritual. Since they raised themselves up to be warriors, all of their food, technology, and materials are provided by the Alliance. This is how one species manages to provide 65% of the Alliance's soldiers. I found their devotion moving and disturbing. The other 35% of the military was split almost down the middle between the Vitiks and the Tifrils. Vitiks resembled an insectoid with 4 arms. Their species had developed their cities on cliffs. Their exoskeletons can take glancing rounds of pulse rifle fire. Their internal organs are weak to shocks, and their joints are susceptible to harsh blows. Tifrils most closely resemble a snake person. Their warriors spit acid and dodge poorly aimed fire with ease. Their strength is far lesser than the Halaki, and their physical armor doesn't hold up against the Vitiks. But they've proven themselves well in covert operations. An interesting oddity I found in my research is that the Halaki have established their religion as galactic military tradition. While freedom of faith is openly allowed, most tend to convert over time naturally. Religion barely exists in the greater galaxy, but you'd never know it looking at the Halaki and the Death Wielders serving with them. Story after story of heroically fanatical assaults and last stands filled my slate. Given the scale of their influence and the sacrifices these warriors go through to achieve victory, I hope that freedom of faith is actually being enforced. I continued my research without rest. File after file after file of skirmishes, fighting styles, typical Death Wielder habits, traditions, mannerisms, and mentalities. Hours, then days passed in a blur of research. I rubbed my eyes as I closed the last document I intended to read a few hours before arrival. Kuth aren't fond of violence, and I'd taken in more militant material in a few days than I'd ever wanted to in my whole life. At least I was finally starting to feel prepared. The days after my arrival before we departed were filled with quiet preparation. As I'd expected, it hadn't taken any time at all to confirm the preparations for first contact were more than above standard. The care and attention to detail was so thorough, I recommended promotions where those the activity log showed played the largest parts. They'd even customized the living quarters according to each sapien's preferences. I had nothing to do, so I spent my time either as a guest of the station's captain or broadening my understanding of the rudimentary technologies typically found in sapiens immediately post-travel development. Nirva's arrival was a far quieter affair than I'd expected it to be. I'd been notified of when he would arrive, of course, but it seemed I'd been the only one in the station, besides the captain and head offices, to know. One moment it was just the first contact cruiser ship in the bay. The next 20 Lancer-class space fighters were flying in and being docked. The station at large hadn't had time to become aware before Nirva had already boarded the cruiser and turned his personal chamber into a command center for his guard. His coordination and preparation seemed to need more care than mine did, as he didn't appear again before Mikri and Yagrak arrived the next morning. Mikri assumed command upon arrival, and Nirva's fighter escort scrambled as we left immediately. Once we were in slip space, our first team meeting began. And that is it for part 2. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope you enjoyed.